Hellfire and the Fall of Empire? Question mark. A solo campaign by Jim Webster. That name should be familiar. His rules are the rules that not kind of. We're using a couple of different rule sets for our Hide's Reach wargame campaign. Permit me a bit of a digression from this book to explain why it seems like we're going a little bit out of sequence. I normally film these videos 2 to 3 weeks in advance, so if I get sick, if I have to travel for work, sharp-eyed viewers will realize that's what's going on here. I can take a couple of weeks off from filming, and you, dear viewer, won't suffer any break in service. However, when you start playing a game like Hellfire, and when you start using the other supplements that Jim makes available, like Hellfire campaigns, if you're new to the whole science fiction, particularly the little 6mm, now these are 15mm figures, of course, will allow it. I'm new to the whole modern era wargaming and ultra-modern near future kind, so I've been leaning heavily on the viewers. However, if I'm filming 2 to 3 weeks ahead of schedule, I am constantly a day late and $1 behind. So I thought, well, while I'm on the road, while I don't have the full kit, while I don't have as much opportunity to record as usual, why don't I go ahead and just do a little pause, let things catch up. So I don't know where we're at in the Hellfire campaigns and Hide's Reach when this goes live. What I do know is that I've got some time to kill and I still want a war game. So I thought it might be worthwhile taking a look at Hellfire and the Fall of Empire, this solo campaign, showing you how it works, because if there's interest, if we're having fun, if we're enjoying this, maybe this will be our next campaign. Maybe with a couple of modern era war games under our belt, we will, of course, have much greater luck at the combat sections of this campaign. And the cards will come into play sooner or later, as you will see. So let me move those out of the way, and let's take a closer look at Hellfire and the Fall of Empire. I think the first thing we should talk about is that the battle rules assume that you're using Hellfire or an equivalent. In the case of the Hellfire rules themselves, Jim puts you in the commander's seat as the commander of roughly a reinforced battalion commander. These assume that you are dealing largely with infantry units supported by a few vehicles. But as you'll see here shortly, Hellfire and the Fall of Empire is much grander in scope. So you may want to get one of his other rule sets, something along the lines of Hell and Fateful Decisions. Just keep that in mind. So you may wind up picking up a couple of these. Even Hellfire I don't think the rules in Hellfire campaigns. Nah, that wouldn't work. Anyway, before we crack open this book, I should point out that the battle rules assume that you are using Hellfire or a reasonable equivalent. Now, the rules for Hellfire are written for predominantly infantry battles reinforced with a few vehicles. It puts you in the seat of the commander of a reinforced infantry battalion. That's really where these rules shine, but the battles in this are generally going to be larger in scope, as you will see shortly. So just keep that in mind. You may want to grab yourself a copy of Hell and Fateful Decisions if you're going to do this solo campaign. And it's a really interesting campaign. It really does harken back to something more along the lines of, say, a Tony Bath, or you can see as you read through this why Henry Hyde taps into the Webster verse so much. I do have a playlist for the Webster verse, so if you want to see more about Jim Webster stuff. I'm really getting into it as I learn the ins and outs of modern warfare. I think it's a pretty good introduction, although, as we've discussed before, Jim's writing style is much more convivial, much more loosey-goosey than modern wargame rules tend to be. They're much more descriptive and less not proscriptive, but yeah, no, I think I said that right. And by the way, also, thank you for all of you that are helping kind of hold my hand and nudge me in the right direction on this modern warfare situation. I really appreciate the help. And I'm sure moving forward, you'll have a lot more input on the Hide's Reach campaign. So let's talk about what's going on in this Hellfire and the Fall of Empire. We're out on a planet. The Decapolis is 10 cities that were dumped on a planet by an Imperial Empire. And the historical vibe that you should get from this is Britain as the Roman Empire is slowly retreating from Hadrian's Wall. Not retrenching, you get the idea. And so what we're going to do is we're going to generate 10 cities and the politics of those cities, and we're going to run through a few years of the campaign, like the first 10 to 20 years, and find out how good a job we can do holding things together. Where most of our campaigns pit one country against another country. One of the reasons I'm so excited to get into this solo campaign is that it evokes a very different feeling that I'm used to. You've got an empire at the end of its days, and the legions are slowly being pulled back. The financial support of the inner core planets is slowly being withdrawn from the outer planets, and we're leaving behind wonderful opportunities for men who are ambitious to carve out a little empire of their own. Of course, the planet that this takes place on is a relatively newly, what would you call it, settled planet. Not settled is probably a bad way to put it. It was kind of a dumping ground for misfits and vagrants of all kinds. And so there's a lot, unlike this planet, which is new, but it's really big and there's a lot of open space and it's fairly well ordered. In this case, you've got a core of these 10 cities, the Decapolis, that are surrounded by barbarians. And things are going to go really well for the first few years. But as the campaign progresses, the natives are going to start getting restless. There's no natives because it's an extraterrestrial planet, obviously, but you get the idea. The barbarians out there. Now there is a little bit of kind of hand waving going on here. Well, why don't you have plasma beam weapons and viral bombs and 12-foot tall mutated clones of a golden emperor stomping around in power armor? Because it's just not that kind of campaign. The idea here is that the Empire invested a whole lot of money into this planet, and then that emperor died under causes that, if you know what's good for you, you will not refer to as mysterious. And the project was abandoned, but all the people still left on the planet said, well, we can make a go of this. And there was still some trade with the Imperial core. So it's on the hinterlands, and it's not a particularly wealthy place, but it does have the support of the Empire, at least initially. And that's where this timeline comes in. That's where it starts. So the first year of the campaign takes place in the year 2943. And as you can see here, every year from now on, you roll a d6. On a 1 or a 2, the Empire withdraws a unit from the Decapolis Brigade. And welcome to Jim Webster's rules. I don't know what that means. Fortunately, I've got the magic of editing. So I can say, you know what, let's turn the page. Let's find out what that is. The military forces that you start out with are given right here. The Decapolis Brigade is the professionals. And it says here, you've got the 654th Mechanized Infantry Brigade, the 33rd Mechanized Infantry, a tube artillery battalion, a support and recovery battalion. Remember I said that Hellfire was for a reinforced battalion? Oh, look, we've got one here, one here. Oh, we're already too big for the Hellfire rules. Already kicking on up into the Hell and Fateful Decisions rules. Anyway, you've got the light air support and recon battalion, Recce. And then, so this is the Imperial forces. The local forces are the Decapolis electronic countermeasures, the field medical facility, the engineer battalion, the aircraft squadron. And these are going to cost us money every year, a total cost of 15,500 credits. How much money do we have? I'm getting a little ahead of things right now, so let's kick back to the way the timeline is going to work. So for every year, you're going to roll a d6, and on a 1 or a 2, the Empire withdraws one of those units. Okay, well, it's just one per year. So, even if you hit that 1 or a 2 every year for the first 4 years, you've got 4 years to replace each of those battalions. Starting on year 3 of the campaign, you roll an additional d6, and on a 1 or a 2, the Empire withdraws all Imperial naval units. Okay, then that triggers other events that will happen. 4 years after the start, you start to roll a d6. On a 1, the Empire stops sending spare parts and specialist ammunition. So this is another trigger that changes the nature of the campaign. Now you have the option. So in other words, what's going on here is Imperial Detroit is in its heyday. It's 1960s. It can produce top of the line, well, maybe 1950s, right? By the 60s, that planned obsolescence was already in full gear. But when Detroit was in its heyday, it was making the top of the line stuff. That whole industrial infrastructure was able to ship stuff out to the hinterlands like Oregon. And Oregon thrived under that situation, but eventually the empire doesn't have money. They're not getting enough out of their empire. Remember, colonies cost a lot of money. Everybody likes to pretend like an empire is a good thing because it rips a lot of wealth from the hinterlands, but the British stopped being an empire because they couldn't afford it. It's expensive. They didn't stop because the idea that they stopped because they just got tired of making money. It's utterly ridiculous. Point being, this is where we're at out here in the hinterlands. All of the high-tech specialized gear is going to start breaking down because we don't have the capability of producing it. Unless we spend a lot of money early on reverse engineering it. That's one of the options you have. And I think you can already see here, 10 minutes into the video, that you have a lot of different options in this campaign for trying to hold this little corner of the empire together. So when the Imperial Navy leaves, let's look at that trigger. Gradual drift of Imperial functionaries. All of the people that have been kind of pushed out here to try to make a name for themselves are going to look around and go, wait a minute. I want to be in the halls of power. I thought this would be a good way for me to establish myself, and then I could go back. But if they're pulling all of the security out of here, if the empire is retreating, I'm not sticking around in darkest Peru. I ain't sticking around in Mysore. I'm getting on the first boat back to London. And that's what's going on here. So over time, your population will begin to decrease, and it will be the best and brightest that are leaving as well. Likewise, when the Navy leaves every year from then on, and you don't know how long that could be, right? That could be 2945, could be 10 years later. But when it happens, you roll a d6 for each of your mercantile cities. We're going to take a look in a little bit. There's 4 kinds of cities. One of them is merchant cities. And if you get a 1, you lose a point of population. Trade is declining, all right? And then this reconfiguration, this is where I was talking about investing in infrastructure. Trigger the Navy. So every year when what is this? This is every year when they stop spending spare parts, Imperial orders are regarded as polite requests if they're considered at all. So that's the good news. At the start of the campaign, you are completely under the thumb of the Empire. You have to do what they say. You got to take care of their stuff. After the Empire leaves, you're on your own, Boobala. You get to make your own choices. If the Empire orders the withdrawal of a unit, you can roll for how many companies leave. And this is where you get into this aspect of a deteriorating empire where, hey, some of the guys have been stationed out here for 20 years. I don't want to go back. This is the kind of thing that happened in the United States. When that hinterland, when everybody got called back to, hey, you got to come fight in the English Civil War, for example, a lot of people were like, no, I'm going to stay here where it's safe. You got to sort that out. And then, oh my gosh, I had kids. They're 16, 17 years old. They're on the local water polo team. I'm not pulling them out of that just because the emperor, whose polite request is that we leave. Now, of course, not everybody's going to feel that way. A lot of people have family back home. They're going to go back to the old home. So at least at that point, you can kind of, the bleeding begins to stop. When the spare parts stop, it's pretty obvious. And then trigger the flight of the Imperial functionaries. Like I said before, roll a d6 for each creative city. This is the artistic centers. And I think this is probably a good time to turn and take a look at those. And on a 1, you lose 1 point of population and income as people just abandon Decapolis as both unfashionable and short of free-spending artistic patrons. Less money means less money for the arts. There is a floor for population loss of your creatives. At a certain point, the fashions change, and everybody that really prefers the New York City and LA axis is going to move to New York and LA, and all of the Nashvillians are going to stay in Nashville and make their own fashions. So your cities will never fall below a population of 7. They generally run from 7 on up. And in fact, you're going to see this as we build our own little mini Decapolis right here. We're going to lay out 10 regions for our 10 cities. And each of these cards will be an area about 50 by 50 miles. So as you can imagine, we're talking about a space 100 miles across by, what would that be, about 250 by 100. That's the size of our little Imperial district. And so without further ado, let me just deal them out. Now, one of the things to point out is that before I lay these out, is that each of these cities has a name, and each of the suits will tell us what kind of city it is. It will either be a government city, a merchant city, a manufacturing city, or a creative city, as we just got done talking about. And those are hearts, diamonds, spades, and clubs, respectively. The number on the card will tell you how big the city is, and there's a couple of other if-then statements that we'll get to in a moment. But it's important to understand that the smallest card that will appear here is going to be a 7. Okay? Now, Jim says discard any cards less than a 7. There's a couple of ways to do this. I could probably just pull out any cards 6 down through ace. Instead, I'm just going to deal out all 10, and then I'm going to start covering up any cards that are less than 7, right? So 8 stays, queen stays, 10 stays, queen stays. So the 5, I'm going to leave that there, and I'm going to deal out all 10 of these cards, and then we will, so here's our 8 of clubs. Now I'm going to go up here, and I'm just going to deal until I get a hit. So there's another black queen, and likewise across the board. 6 is too small. We get a red 8. We get a black king. We get a, we got to go deep. There you go. Jack, and finally a 7. So there's our smallest town. What else can we infer from this using the rules as provided by Jim? The row with the most court cards, we'll call this the north, is the coast. This down here then will be inland. So we're kind of hugging that coast. Your capital is the card with the largest heart. So this city here, Hippos, is going to be our capital. Not the biggest city, mind you, but one of the bigger cities. Not only that, but it's the only government city we have. As you can see, and as you can infer, any single campaign of this will be completely different from every other campaign as the nature, size, and character of your cities changes. For example, we have, in this case, I've got 3 spades, and spades are manufacturing cities, queen, 7, and 8. So we're pretty good there. I've got 2, 3 clubs, king, queen, 8, and those are going to be our creative cities. So we've put quite a bit into merchants, manufacturing, creative, the diamonds or merchant cities. So not so much on the merchants, really big on the, I think larger on the creativity here. So out here in the wilds. And then each territory, yeah, he leaves it up to yourself. About a square, about 50 miles across. So let me write all this down. And this is what the map looks like. Just some pretty rough notes. I'm using the same 10 city names that Jim Webster used. Scythopolis, manufacturing city. It's got a population of 8. And I even drew a little icon. See the little factory? For our government, I drew a jackboot. For trade, I drew the almighty dollar. And then for artsy, I drew the little happy frowny face. Now, if you total up all of the populations, what you get is 100 altogether. This is a little bit more than is given in the example. But that's important because you generate, each point of population, each month will generate 200 credits worth of tax revenue. You can bump that up over the course of a campaign, but if you do, well, obviously you get more money, but you also start to suffer odd random effects. Cities may start to defect. If a barbarian tribe takes over a city and you've been crushing them with heavy taxes, they may welcome the barbarians with open arms. So something to consider. Again, more balancing that you have to do. I've got a total population of 100, and each of these cities, the little 2 numbers you see down here, half of the population will provide a militia. The other half will provide expeditionary forces. So this is the military strength of each city. The number before this backslash is the expeditionary companies. So Gadara here will provide 5 companies that will go wherever, I don't care, and 5 companies of militia that will defend the city when attacked. Obviously, if Philadelphia down here gets attacked, you can send out this expeditionary company. You can recruit these guys into your own regional forces to replace the forces of the Empire as they leave. So let's talk about economics now. Well, should we do economics or should we do the hinterlands? Let's do economics first, because this is important. Remember that chart I showed you a little bit ago that shows you what you start with? We start with a total cost of 15,000 credits per month. In the Decapolan year, there are 10 months. Keeps it nice and simple. Obviously, I'm going to be making 4,500 a month over the 10 months. I will have an excess of 45,000 credits. I can spend them all on generating new forces to replace those that I know I'm about to leave. Or, if I'm smart, I will each year produce a battalion of my own. An infantry battalion, a mechanized battalion, some artillery, and I'll save some money in my reserve. Because once the Empire leaves, I'm going to lose a lot of benefits. And you'll see that. I'll be glad to have that money later. In fact, one of the big benefits is that when the barbarians come, a lot of them are just here for the money. And so rather than spending a lot of blood trying to keep them at bay, particularly if you got 3 or 4, you may be able to just buy them off. Hey guys, here's some cash, leave us alone. Once you pay the Dane Geld, you're never rid of the Dane. The only way to get rid of the Dane is by kicking him in the teeth. However, there is an opportunity because multiple barbarians will be coming at you from multiple angles. Some of these guys might actually say, hey, we're just here for the money and the fight. And you can say, well, you know what? I've got 20,000 credits here that says you can go fight with those barbarians over there. You can hire mercenaries, which again comes with its own positives and negatives. But it is an option, and it may be important if you have to, if you got 3 guys to fight, and you can let you and him fight, then I only have to send my hometown boys to fight this other guy. So who do you have to fight? And it's important, I think, that we look at who you are going to be fighting first, and then we'll figure out where they're coming from. There are 10 barbarian tribes, and bear in mind, when I say barbarian, I mean non-imperial. Some of these guys are at about the 20th century, our current level of technology, and that's the level that the Empire was comfortable at. We're at about a tech level 7 or 8 in Traveler terms. I think I glossed that over earlier. And so are most of these guys. Well, some of these guys are not. Some of them are just, they're basically just spear chuckers. They're attacking you with bows and improvised weapons. One of these guys at least is like a Mad Max faction almost. But before we look at those 10, let's take a look at what the options are. When they show up, like I said, they might raid you. And what's really nice about this table, well, first, they can raid you. Their objective may be to take a city. Maybe they can be bought off. Maybe they are doing a huge raid and they want to take possession of several cities. Or maybe they're willing to serve as paid allies. Obviously, when they show up, you're going to roll a d6, and that will tell you what that year's barbarian tribe is looking for. Now, the interesting thing about this, and I love this mechanic, is that you don't know exactly what this Hardwater Co-Dominion is all about, and we can take a look at a couple of these later, but it doesn't really matter for right now. What's important to understand is that the Hardwater Co-Dominion, they're 50-50, man. They may be here to kick you in the teeth, and they may be here to, just looking for some money. Maybe they can help you out. Whereas the Puka down here, no, they're just raiders, right? They're more than likely just here. They're not looking to settle down, okay? They're just looking to have a good time. They don't want to put labels on anything. And then the Faustian Horde host down here, likewise, they're really just looking to raid. But then you have other people that are, look at this, who is it? The Bakatan Empire. They were held at bay by the Imperial forces. The Imperial Navy could nuke them from orbit. With the Imperial Navy gone, there's a very good chance that either them or the Popular Front is looking to secure a homeland of their own, and your home looks like pretty good land. So again, over time, their attitudes can shift, and over time, things can change. When you roll up who's coming to get you, when the Empire's in town, you're going to roll a d6 rather, and subtract 4, and that's how many of these guys come at you, bro. Obviously, you're only on a 5 or a 6 are you going to get 1 or 2 raiding companies, and you've got really good Imperial forces to push them back across the border. As the campaign rolls on, however, you're going to be on your own, and now it's just a straight D6. Every year, D6 of these guys are coming at you. Now, the good news is there's a pretty good chance that one or two of them can be bought off or will serve as paid allies. The Ruba, I like you. Oh, look at you guys, right? Oh, we like the Ruba. And maybe now is a good time to take a look at what the Ruba are really like. I will point out first, though, that if they're coming to take a city, it's going to be a small force. If they're coming to take several cities, they wild and boy. They are bringing a big force. And each one of these barbarian hordes has a different army list, if you will, based on what their objective are. So for the Ruba, yeah, these are the guys. One of the more backwards people, clan and clan based. Each clan and subclan will provide military forces. They tend to walk everywhere. So an infantry unit will have 8 to 12 D8 plus 2 bases. And I think an infantry unit, I think you sort of those as a company. The men may have personal projectile weapon, flak armor. They carry a man-portable unguided missile. They might have some artillery. They got a little bit of armor. So here's what we're really interested in. And these numbers, they're basically like hit points for each of the stands and how effective they are. But again, that goes back to the Hellfire rules, and I don't know a whole lot about that. So I'm going to gloss over that deliberately. So on a normal raid, if they're just coming raiding, D6 infantry units, so there you go. That's where you're rolling the D8 plus, what did we say, 2 for how many bases. I may be doing this all pen and paper. 1 artillery unit for every 3 units. So if I roll D6 and I get 5 units, I'm going to have 2 artillery batteries. I'm going to get 1 tank company for every 3 infantry units. So again, if I roll a 5, they're going to have 2 artillery units and 2 tank companies. That's if they're coming just to raid. If they're making a major push, now you're looking at D8 plus 4, anywhere from 5 to 12 infantry, with the same ratio of artillery and tank companies. Yeah, boy, you're in for some hurting. Because, I mean, you're going to get a minimum of 2 artillery and 2 tank companies, and probably, the average roll is going to be an 8 or a 9, so you're probably going to get 9 infantry and 3 of each. Remember, our empire is only 100 miles across, so they're going to be able to move to the inner cities in a day, maybe 2 at the most. Then we look at this policy, politically moderate. So for all 10 of these, you have to roll a D10 each year, and on a 1, you get a new head of state. When that happens, they will not come at you that year. And I'm not quite sure how that works, because I'm not sure if it means, well, just don't include them in the roll, or if you roll them, then treat it as a nobody comes. I think that's the way to do it. I think that might be the way I do it. The rules aren't entirely clear. The other thing here is the long-term policy is to gain access to at least 1 city. And I think what that means is once they capture one of your cities, they're not going to come at you anymore. But again, it's not clear to me whether that means don't include them in your random list. So instead of rolling a D10 to find out who's coming, just roll a D9 because they're not coming. Or maybe roll a D10, and if they come up, you just ignore it. That may be a judgment call based on how well you're doing in the campaign. And now we're going to roll back to an interesting concept about our own little mini empire to be, and that's the concept of who's running the show. For the barbarians, if a change in leadership occurs that year, they're not going to go anywhere. They're trying to fix the political situation. They'll be back next year. And that one, I think, is explicit, that if you roll them and they're going through their internal turmoil, they just don't show up. You have a much more complicated situation. Every year, you roll a D20, and on a 1, the current governor has died and a replacement takes over. There's a chance that the succession is disputed. There's a 1 in 6 chance. You roll a D6, and on a 1, a usurper enters play. The usurper can himself be usurped. Once you have that disputed succession, roll a D10 every year. And I think it's kind of important to point out that if you're rolling for the health of a governor and he survives 5 rolls, then switch to a D10. So as time goes on, your governor gets older. He's much more likely to die and trigger this, hey, who's in charge now? But let's take a look at what happens when a usurper enters play, because things get complicated. You draw a playing card for each of the cities under control of the previous governor. If this happens later in the campaign, you may be hanging on to like 3 cities. You got to draw 3 cards, or 6 cards. If it happens year 1, it could happen. then you're going to, and by the way, death might be of mysterious causes, right? This could be a total lone gunman situation. So draw a further card for all the regular forces under the control of the previous governor. Allied forces supplied by barbarians don't get a card. Oh. So you can actually recruit some of these barbarians. If you're really hurting for population and you have allies that are doing a good job, you can bring them into your cities and replace your population. That has some knock-on effects. As you know, it turns out when you invite a bunch of immigrants into your little nation, they change the character of that nation. Who knew? Allied forces don't get a card. Those currently hired will count as part of the regular forces. So military settlers, that's what I was talking about. You can bring them in. Military settlers are loyal to the legitimate successor. The legitimate successor gets the regular forces and all cities who draw the same color card. That means black or white. So if the regular forces draw a heart, then all the cities drawing hearts and diamonds support the legitimate successor. So you're going to get, in other words, capital city draws a red card. All the red cards are going to support him. Even if the rest of the cards are 50-50, you can have a little bit of a stronger force for the legitimate government as opposed to the usurper. Only those cities for the black cards will wind up going revolting. But then again, remember we talked about taxes? If you've raised taxes to very high, the usurper gets one city to discard their card, and you're serving as a neutral referee here, remember? So you're going to say, well, the usurper will probably choose to have one city discard their red card and hope that he gets a black one. If your taxes are ruinous, if they're through the roof, you can have two cities do this. And then you have to abide. It's basically like a reroll, right? Both sides can attempt to bribe barbarians, otherwise the campaign can proceed. And then each city drew a card. Up to that point, it doesn't matter what color it is. Now the suit. The legitimate successor suit is the one that the army drew. If this was a heart, the usurper's personal suit is spades. So you just kind of flip. Hearts, spades, clubs, diamonds. And then those cities that share your personal suit are loyal to you. So you're drawing out new cards. So that's an interesting thing that you have to worry about internal politics. There's one other thing I want to show you guys before this video gets to be too long, and that is the rest of the map. So we got these barbarians coming in, and we've talked about their political situation, but where are they coming from? Well, the good news is they're not coming from the ocean. They're going to come from the land side. And the other good news is we may be able to predict a little bit where they come from by looking at where the high mountains are versus where the more rugged hills are. And the assumption here is that you're going to settle the choicest territory first. The really good farmland, the low fertile lands, that's where people are going to settle. That's where all these 10 cities are. Kind of a little more rugged on the outside. And the way we determine that is with our handy-dandy deck of San Diego playing cards. Yeah, I figured I might as well bring as long as I'm on the road, I might as well bring a souvenir from another business trip. And as always, I am going to shuffle these live on camera just to show you I'm not cheating. What we're going to do is we're going to deal out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 cards. One bordering each, picture this as a grid, right? And what's going to happen is the diamonds will be mountains, hearts will be open plains, black cards will be rough hills. And, I guess, what did it say? It says, for the two edges, I would suggest black cards are rough hills, while the red cards are, so it's a little bit different. Okay. Let me just deal them out, and we'll figure this out. So now I'm not overly concerned about the value of the cards. I'm really just worried about the color. Let's see. So there's my 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I need 3 more out here. There you go. So using our system, what we wind up with is a map that looks like this. All right, I dealt one too many cards, so I just rotated them up. Same order, fixes the misdeal. So what's the result? If we take a little closer look at the map and stop worrying about the cards, what we find is that we've got 2 plains over here to the west. Over here to the east, we've got plains and rough hills. Then we've got to the south. Now notice I have mountains and mountains. If you used the same criteria, which I guess you could, I would have wound up with mountains like this. And then, so essentially what we got here is kind of a mountain range along the southern edge with a pass through it just south of Garasa, and then rough hills, rough hills. Now these are important because the different barbarians will have different terrain types that they come through. Some of these guys are plains wanderers, and when you generate those barbarians showing up, they're going to show up from one of the plains hexes, so to speak. Some of these barbarian forces are mountain tribesmen, and then what you're going to do is, after you have those barbarians show up and they come on in this space, anytime they show up in the future, they'll come up from that same space. At a certain point, you're going to have to make some arbitrary decisions. You may decide, look, I've already got my 6 tribes in the area. It's getting crowded. That's enough. I'm just going to roll, instead of rolling a D10 on all 10 tribes, my world only has these 6, and I'm just going to keep rolling a D6. Bear in mind, if you completely thump one of these barbarian tribes, deliver huge casualties to them, they're not coming back for D6 years. And in some cases, if you just throw them off, like if they have named units, if they're like that Bakatan Empire, if you defeat them in battle, they're going to take a full year off to replenish their losses before they come back at full strength. So there is some incentive to really hammer these guys and keep them away. The question now arises, how do I win this dang thing? How you lose should be fairly obvious. But what if you get lucky? You don't have a whole lot of barbarians. You're generating huge amounts of wealth, and you're able to produce enough forces to keep your hinterlands safe, to the point that, at a certain point, Gaul becomes France. When does that happen for you? And there's a couple of different ways that can happen. Remember, you're not the only guy that's going through this same process. There are a number of other planets where the same thing is going on. And there's a chance that one of those planets is a pirate planet. The Vikings show up. And so Jim gives us this last little table. For the first 20 years, roll a D percentile every year. On a 1%, something important happens. Maybe it's a Viking raid. Now, he calls them Starmancers, but you get it. And maybe the Empire returns. Maybe we were just holding things together during an interregnum, and a new emperor takes the throne, and he says, I'm reversing the decline. And he does what you do, only better. And so he comes back with the legions and says, hey, thanks for keeping a lid on things. Why don't you move your family into the inner core worlds, or I will appoint you full-time governor. Maybe there's some reward for you, right? But on the other hand, maybe these Starmancers, these Vikings, come and start to raid you. Now we're looking at, the year 5 and 600. Those filthy, is it the Saxons showing up to beat up on the Bretons? Maybe they come because they're willing to trade. Maybe it's a local warlord, right? Maybe he's got it's not just a barbarian raid. So a couple of things. One is the barbarian, the pirates that come to raid you, they may offer you a deal. Hey, we've been kind of going a pirating all over the place and we're looking for a Tortuga. We'll pay you if you serve as our base of operations. And you make some extra money. Of course, puts a big bullseye on your neck, and there's a pretty good chance that the next guys rolling through are hunting those pirates, are going to try to destroy their base of operations, meaning your place. On the other hand, it could be a trade mission. On the other hand, it could be a local warlord, and he says, hey, you know what? I like what you're doing here. Why don't we combine forces? And by combine forces, right, so this one is, a new empire arrives. Maybe he offers you a deal you can't refuse. You keep running the show and just give 10% of your tax base to me, and I'll send my new Imperial forces. Right? Maybe we're getting into that. What would the new empire be, right? Like you've shifted your liege from Rome to Constantinople, right? That kind of situation goes on. Maybe it turns out you're caught between those two, and the best thing for you to do is to accept a new emperor who's, meet the new, same as the old, right? So there are some victory conditions, some definitive end conditions. And of course, if you're having a good time and you're just generating tabletop battles to fight, you just go ahead and play it for 100 years, see what happens to your Decapolis. So that's a brief rundown on how this campaign system works. And there are a lot of really interesting options and choices, and it will generate some interesting battles for your campaign world. And I think, now that I've run through the numbers, and I kind of like this. If we do run a campaign in this, comments down, do the whole like, oh, please support my YouTube, blah, 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 would you like to subscribe? But seriously, if you're interested in seeing how this campaign runs, then maybe, now I'm not going to abandon Hyde's Reach. Like I said, I want you guys' help. I want to get a little more comfortable with modern day, larger, kind of battalion, brigade size encounters. I think the fights in this are going to be smaller than what we saw on Hyde's Reach, and because the map is condensed, it's not going to be quite as much operational, like fudging of the numbers to get our one division to hold 600 miles of territory. So this might work a little bit better. But we will at least finish out and bring the other campaign to a resolution before we do that. But look at this, man. I'm just going to have to pretty this map up. Hey, until next time, thanks for watching. I'm praying for you.